Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now to one of Nigeria's neighbors, Chad, where the official results of the presidential elections are expected to be declared later on Thursday. It's not likely to surprise many. The incumbent president, Idris Deby, is expected to win a sixth term, given that the opposition boycotted Sunday's polls. But another foregone conclusion is that not everyone is happy, and there have been rumblings of trouble in the north of Chad after the army said they carried out airstrikes and sent reinforcements to counter a rebel group there. There have also been issues, of course, long-running issues with Boko Haram and an insurgency taking place around the Lake Chad Basin. Well, for more on what's been happening in Chad, I'm joined now by the African Affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, Jon Offei Ansah, who's been monitoring developments in the West African country. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jon. It's been a while. I expect you've been having a jolly nice holiday somewhere. I'm just kidding.
I don't think so. I've been in lockdown working from home.
Yeah, COVID has restricted a lot of movement, I'm afraid. But let's get straight to it. Tell us, first of all, about your assessment of the conduct of the elections in Chad.
Well, I knew from the get-go that the conclusion would be a foregone one, that Idris Deby would win, because that guy, that president, is very, he uses a combination of hardline tactics and political savvy. Somebody who's been in office since 1990 in the coup d'etat and metamorphosed into a civilian leader. And he knows how to, he's mastered, the complexities of the nation's politics and the power play between the many ethnic groups and the clans. So he's a master of the game. So we all knew that, we all knew what the outcome of the election would be.
Right, and I mean, we'll talk a little bit about Idris Deby himself and the strategy that he's used to survive for so many years in Africa. I mean, in Chad as the leader of that country. But just looking at the election results, we're expecting partial results to emerge today, Thursday, and I understand that the Independent Electoral Commission in Chad has till the 25th of April to publish the provisional results of the first round.
Yes, every election in every country in Africa has its own peculiarities. I will not forget that Chad, terrain is a desert terrain. There are some polling stations in remote areas. So all this, will take time for the balance to arrive at the electoral commission's headquarters to be collated, counted, collated, and all that. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, every country has its own peculiarities. So to me, this is normal.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a good point. I suppose it's not unique to Africa. Every country in the world has its own peculiarities. But the final results, from what I understand, and I just want to talk about some of these issues and then get them out of the way. The final results will apparently be published by the Supreme Court by May the 15th. Why does it take so long to get the final tally, and why the Supreme Court? I mean, is it simply going to ratify the result?
Yes, again, every country has its own nuances, right? I mean, Ghana, Nigeria, the Electoral Commission announces the final, and the results are final. And unless one aggrieved party decides to challenge it in the court, in the Supreme Court. But in Chad's case, I think that's what their constitution allows for, that after the electoral body has announced the results, it needs to be ratified, maybe given some legal backing for the Supreme Court. So again, this is one of the peculiarities of the Chadian electoral system.
But what about the amount of time that it takes to emerge? I mean, I understand it's their system, but I'm trying to understand why it takes that long. I mean, because, for example, I mean, the election took place last Sunday. Why is the final result out in May? Is it because of the size of the country, the logistics of gathering the results, or some constitutional issue that we're not aware of?
I believe it's a combination of both. Number one, combination of both, the size, and again, like I said, the terrain is an unforgiving one. You know, Chad is mainly desert. They are remote areas. You know, you mentioned logistics. Yeah, logistics come in here as well. So I believe maybe the constitution framers, maybe in their wisdom, because decided to give the Electoral Commission ample time to gather all the ballots, collate everything, count everything, and then before they announce the results, and then submit to the to the Supreme Court to ratify. So again, it is one of the peculiarities, the nuances, you know, of the Chadian electoral system.
Right, and talking about those peculiarities, I understand that if it happens that no candidate gets more than 50% of the votes, then there will be a rerun on May the 25th. But that scenario seems very unlikely, doesn't it? Given that Idris Deby will probably win.
It is most unlikely. I mean, we all know that even before the elections, Deby, you know, came out to say that, okay, he knew he was going to win the elections, and he is going to win. And again, that more than 50%, again, it is the norm in most African countries. One is the winner must get 50. In Ghana, for instance, it is 50 plus 1. I don't know exactly what updates in Nigeria. But having said that, Deby is going to win more than the required 50% of the votes. So it's a foregone conclusion.
And some of the opposition candidates, from what we understand, were barred from running. Is that why the opposition decided to boycott the ballot, or are there other reasons why they withdrew from the race?
Yeah, because the level ground wasn't, the playing field wasn't level. Okay, and there were so many instances of intimidation of the opposition, violence, you know, meted out, you know, to the opposition by the security forces, and so on and so forth. So the opposition decided to not to legitimize the election by participating. But again, Idris Deby is one savvy operator. You know, from initial number of 16 candidates, it was voted down to 6 through high court actions, which actually disbarred some candidates from running, and again some other candidates deciding, as you said, not to legitimize, you know, the election by running at all. And again, so of the 6 candidates that were left, they were largely seen as, you know, soft opposition that were seen to be quite malleable, that could be manipulated by Idris Deby. So the whole thing actually is a farce, if you ask me. Yeah.
Yes, that's probably a rather appropriate way of describing it. And of course, it's not just the opposition in Chad that have been complaining about the elections. There's been some international criticism as well, hasn't there? I mean, Human Rights Watch published a report that talked about a crackdown on the opposition.
Yes, I mentioned it already. I mean, the security. Idris Deby used the security forces to, number one, intimidate, to crack down of the opposition, and so on and so on and so forth. I mean, again, this is the norm. We saw it happen in Uganda. We saw it happen in. It's become part of the political narrative or election narrative in Africa. Sadly, so. Right, it's a reality that we are Africans are learning to live with. You know, that's sad narrative. But what the human rights bodies and organizations say is true. I mean, Deby used the security forces at his disposal to stifle the opposition. I mean, there was one instance where one opposition member called Success Masra, 38-year-old political firebrand in Chad, who was tracked by the security forces so much so that he had to seek refuge in the U.S. embassy in N'Djamena, right? But a few days later, or a week later, he was seen, you know, in a photo with Deby, all smiling with Deby on Idris Deby's Facebook page, describing him as a young compatriot. I mean, that's how savvy Idris Deby is. He knows how to manipulate the opposition. He knows how to intimidate them. He knows to get them. He knows how to get them out of the way.
Well, that's a very interesting story you just told, and it sort of evoked a bit of a laugh here from a lot of people, because that's so characteristically African when it comes to politics, isn't it? And given all that, John, is this sixth term of President Idris Deby likely to be dogged by issues of legitimacy or not?
Listen, Charles, look, let me use an analogy. We all saw what happened in Uganda between Museveni and Bobi Wine, the main opposition leader. Okay, nothing will come out of it because Deby, you know, is a staunch ally of the West, helping the West. I mean, to go any further, Chad has one of the best armies in the West African sub-region. So it is assisting the West to fight the jihadist Islamic, you know, insurgencies, you know, in the whole region. So the West, no matter what, the West will turn a blind eye because he is very useful to them. He is very useful in helping to stem, you know, the rising tide of jihadist activities in the region.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time here for the first half. We want to talk with you some more, so don't go anywhere. But it's very interesting what you tell us. And when we come back from a break, I would like us to talk a little bit about this thing that you talked about, Chad's role in the fight against terrorism and insurgencies and all that, because I understand they're doing quite a lot of work, not just in the Lake Chad Basin, but also as it relates to the Sahel region. And they get quite a lot of support from the French and from a lot of Western countries. Would like to do a bit of analysis on that when we come back. So thank you for talking to us so far, John, and do stay with us because we want to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the publisher of Africa Briefing about the election results in Chad. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. So after so much controversy, allegations of brutality against protesters and a boycott of the polls by the opposition, election results in Chad are expected to give President Idris Deby, one of Africa's longest serving leaders, a sixth term. But with Human Rights Watch describing a ruthless crackdown on key opponents and anti-government demonstrations met with savage force, how legitimate will the international community consider Mr Deby's sixth term to be as he cruises to electoral victory? Well, the fact is that Western powers have consistently turned a blind eye to President Deby's autocratic rule. He was a key French ally in curbing Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi's expansion further south, and when a Chadian rebel force tried to overthrow Mr Deby by advancing from Libya, in 2019, France deployed warplanes to come to his aid. Since 2014, various civil society movements, from students to labor unions, have protested against the worsening economic and political environment, but Mr Deby has crushed all dissent, and the wealth from Chad's oil fields has never trickled down to the broader public, making Chad one of the poorest countries in the world. And the African affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, Jon Offei Ansah, who's been monitoring developments in Chad, is still with me on the line. Jon, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And before we went on break, we talked briefly about the impact that all this that I mentioned in the intro there is likely to have on the 6th term of President Idris Deby, whether his term is likely to be dogged by issues of legitimacy. And you pointed out how vital his role is to the West, which is pretty much why they turn a blind eye to the iron fist he uses to rule Chad. So tell us a bit about what he's actually doing, or expand more on what you said previously about what he's actually doing in fighting the insurgency in the Lake Chad Basin, for example, in fighting terrorism in the Sahel region, and the role that he's playing in that fight.
Yes. Number one, I mean, I mentioned earlier that Chad has one of the best, armies, in the Sahel region, if not in the whole of the West African sub-region, right? And in fact, his army has been quite instrumental, in controlling the spread of Boko Haram, for instance. And again, it's been very, very instrumental in repelling attacks by jihadists from the north part, from the northern Sahara down to the south. So he's done very well. And again, even in February, at a meeting of the Sahelian leaders, he pledged to send 1,200 troops, along the Sahelian borders to counter the advances of the jihadi groups in that area. So all in all, I mean, he has actually been quite instrumental in stemming, the increasing tide of jihadist activities within the Sahelian region and other parts of West Africa.
So, I mean, never mind what the likes of Human Rights Watch and so on are saying. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, they actually produced a report on what they see as the violations, human rights violations and so on in Chad. In spite of all that, Western countries are likely to look the other way, because Idris Deby, though clearly a dictator, is seen as an ally in the war on terror, and therefore something as trivial as another election marred by violence and intimidation is likely to be ignored.
Exactly so, absolutely. It's good we know, because he is very, very useful to them. Okay, and look, we have so many instances of Western nations propping up autocratic, corrupt African leaders. I mean, the list is endless, And Idris Deby is, one of them among the current, autocratic dictatorial African leaders, being more or less being prop up by the West. And again, Chad is very, very oil rich, but then the management of the oil resources too is raises, more questions than answers. So all in all, I mean, the West is bound to, so long as he remains useful to the West, in the fight against terrorism in West Africa, I mean, he'll forever or continue turning a blind eye to his autocratic rule.
And Jon, you mentioned oil there. Chad has considerable oil resources, and presumably that is one way that he uses to prop himself up. But I wonder how much of that trickles down to the larger populace, because I understand that Chad is one of the poorest countries in the world.
It is one of the poorest, statistically one of the poorest countries in the world. And with the falling oil prices, the government revenue, obviously oil exporting country, the government relies on oil exports, for more than maybe 70-80% of its foreign revenue. So with the falling oil prices, the government's fiscal space has been a bit restricted. So it resulted in the government making cuts in public services, which again, is stoking or is causing some unrest among the population in Chad. I mean, recently the government, the China government, applied to the IMF and the other multilateral lending agencies for debt relief. So, and this is something that the IMF, is planning to consider. So, I mean, the oil revenue, yes, has gone down, and government's public sector services have been reduced, and then it's going to affect the poor Chadians, further.
Yes, but of course, as you said, I mean, he's got another source of income, doesn't he? As long as he continues to fight terrorism and his role in the fight against terrorists both in the Sahel and in the Lake Chad Basin is recognized in the West, then that will remain a central element of his legitimacy in the West. And just reading a bit about Chad, I understand that has become one of the main geostrategic factors that informs the perception of Chad in the West. So no matter how backward the democratic process is in the country, or no matter how badly he, treats his people or how corrupt he is, the West continues to overlook that iron fist that Mr Deby wields over Chad. And just one point that I need to make, and then you can respond and then we'll have to go. I understand that it doesn't matter really whether questions of legitimacy are raised. The main issue is that his government is going to be a legal government because it'll be ratified by the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. I mean, once the Supreme Court has ratified it, the government is a legitimate government that nobody can question. So yes, he will rule for another 5-6 year term and extend in addition to the 30 years he served already. So obviously, yes, it's going to be a legitimate government and it's going to continue enjoying whatever largesse he's receiving from the West because of his importance in the crucial role he plays in fighting the jihadist Islamist insurgency in the Sahel.
In 10 seconds or so, he will be legally elected, but he's likely to face opposition going forward. Very briefly.
Yes, he's going to face opposition, not only for the politics, but also for the economic hardships they are bound to experience owing to the drop in the oil revenues.
Thank you very much indeed. Jon Offei Ansah is the publisher of Africa Briefing, and he was talking to me about Chad. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, London and the United States, bye-bye and thank you for watching.